publicados en diferentes tipologías, tesis, libros, capítulos de libros, artículos científicos, reportes de investigación, entre otros. Hoy tendremos la oportunidad de conversar entre todos y conocer dos infraestructuras abiertas importantes y reconocidas en nuestro continente. Hago mención a LAReferencia y Érudit. La dinámica de nuestra conversación consiste en una intervención por parte de dos invitadas especiales. Cada una contará con 10 minutos de exposición y posteriormente tendremos una sesión de preguntas. Sin más preámbulo, iniciamos con la infraestructura LAReferencia a cargo de Bianca Amaro. Ella es presidente de la red de repositorios de acceso abierto de la ciencia LAReferencia, coordinadora del programa brasileño de acceso abierto IBICT Brasil, con doctorado en lingüística aplicada por la Universidad Pompeu Fabra, España, y licenciada en Derecho y Letras. Trabaja los temas de comunicación científica, copyright, acceso abierto a la información científica y ciencia abierta, y es miembro del comité directivo de la Confederación de Open Access Repositories, COA. Bianca, bienvenida y un gusto tenerte en esta sesión.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. Es un gusto estar aquí y gracias a Jimena, a Walter por la invitación y tenerles esta oportunidad de hablar un poquito sobre la referencia. Como sé que tenemos poquito tiempo para presentaciones, yo voy directamente a mi presentación para hablarles. Será un punto de partida para nuestra conversación en general. Bueno, nosotros, o sea, de Latinoamérica, ciertos que la ciencia es un bien público, pensamos juntos, varios países latinoamericanos, o sea, nos unimos dentro de un proyecto BID para crear una red latinoamericana de repositorios de acceso abierto. La idea era aprovechar el movimiento de acceso abierto para hacer visible nuestra producción científica para el mundo entero. Porque tenemos bastante claro que hoy en día con Internet, aquellos que no son visibles no existen. Así de claro y sencillo. Entonces, para una actuación conjunta, porque juntos sabemos que somos más fuertes, creamos la red de repositorios de acceso abierto a la ciencia, LAReferencia. O sea, ¿qué es que tiene de peculiar, interesante en la red LAReferencia? Es que es una red de repositorios de ciencia abierta hoy en día constituida por autoridades gubernamentales de ciencia, tecnología e innovación. Ella ha sido fundada en 2012. ¿Y por qué yo pongo en relieve la participación de las autoridades? Porque esto lleva a que los países tengan que organizarse, o sea, si tienen el visto bueno de las autoridades gubernamentales, la cosa queda un poco menos difícil en la creación de las infraestructuras. Bueno, la misión de la referencia, más que nada, es traer y dar, posibilitar, tener acceso y dar visibilidad a la producción científica de América Latina y países asociados. Y ya explicaré el porqué de países asociados un poquito más adelante. Básicamente era importante dar esta visibilidad no solamente para el mundo exterior, pero también dentro de nuestros mismos países. O sea, organizar la producción para que nosotros pudiéramos saber qué es que se producía en términos de ciencia en nuestros países. O sea, hoy en día ya estamos trabajando no solamente con la parte de publicaciones, pero también con los datos de investigación. Y por eso trabajamos ya dentro de este grande concepto que es la ciencia abierta. O sea, siempre la idea es fortalecer la visibilidad, porque esto trae solo ventajas. O sea, el movimiento de acceso abierto y la ciencia abierta es una oportunidad increíble para nosotros. Bueno, venga, sal de aquí. Hoy tenemos como miembros 12 países. Son estos que están aquí, y podéis ver que tenemos aquí a España, que no es de Latinoamérica, pero como tenemos ya una cooperación histórica en términos de ciencia y tecnología, y España pidió para formar parte, España forma parte hoy en día de nuestra red. Esto también trae la importancia que tiene nuestra red. Nuestro modelo de funcionamiento es respetando las acciones nacionales, o sea, todos los países tienen un nodo nacional y la referencia cosecha toda esta producción para un nodo agregador, que es el nodo agregador de la referencia. Hoy en día tenemos alianzas internacionales muy importantes, como podéis ver aquí en este listado, o sea, estamos trabajando con datos, estamos trabajando muy cerca de la Research Data Alliance. Y es muy importante decir también que estamos buscando, o sea, nos están buscando la referencia para colaboraciones con otras redes internacionales. Y esto ha pasado, por ejemplo, con las redes científicas de África. Hemos firmado un memorando de entendimiento para trabajar en conjunto. Es muy importante la unión de los países del sur del planeta para que el mundo pueda conocer la ciencia que se hace por aquí. La referencia hoy en día podría decir que ya tiene voz y voto en las principales iniciativas nacionales. Yo diría que nuestra principal fuerza es respetar, es convivir, respetar y aprovechar las diferencias entre los países. O sea, respetamos todas nuestras diferencias y aprovechamos de cómo se hacen las cosas en determinados países. Aquí no importa que un país grande no es más importante que un país chico. O sea, Brasil no es más importante que cualquier país que forme parte hoy en día de la referencia. Y yo puedo asegurarles que hoy en día la referencia es enviada por todo el mundo, porque logramos tener esta convivencia pacífica y constructiva entre los países. Una de nuestras principales fuerzas es nuestro software, que es el software de la referencia, que es escalable, de código abierto, está creciente en la comunidad. Entonces es una fuerza, una herramienta que muchos países y organizaciones están buscando para utilizar en sus infraestructuras. Bueno, ahora estamos trabajando también para la creación de un ecosistema regional de ciencia abierta para Latinoamérica. O sea, esto significa la construcción de sistemas CRIS. ¿Qué significa esto? Current Research Information System, para que todos podamos, para que tengamos una fotografía de toda la ciencia en todos sus puntos de trabajo. O sea, estamos trabajando en todos los niveles. O sea, hoy en día ya tenemos desarrollos importantes en Perú, que sería el Perú CRIS, y también en Brasil, que sería el BR CRIS. Y tenemos también una comunicación muy fuerte con Portugal junto al desarrollo de PT CRIS. Espera, sale esto de aquí. Solo para terminar. O sea, estamos trabajando muy duro en muchos frentes. Entonces, o sea, lo más importante y los retos que tenemos ahora es que cada día tenemos más países, pero nuestra idea es tener a todos los países de América Latina dentro de la referencia para que podamos decir, sí, es una red que representa toda América Latina. Bueno, era esto que quería hablar con todos. Muchísimas gracias. Espero no haberme pasado mucho.
Muchas gracias, Bianca, por tu exposición y socializar los aportes de la referencia a toda la comunidad que nos acompaña. Ahora pues vamos a conocer el proyecto Érudit a cargo de Tanja Niemann, quien tiene el título de maestría en comunicación de la Universidad de Leipzig, Alemania, donde se especializó en estudios de libro y publicación. Se vinculó a Érudit desde el año 2006, se ha hecho responsable de las relaciones con editores y el desarrollo de colecciones. Tiene un amplio conocimiento de todos los aspectos relacionados con infraestructura tecnológicamente avanzada para publicaciones académicas y la difusión de producción investigativa en humanidades y ciencias sociales. También está muy familiarizada con la diversidad del ecosistema de publicación en humanidades y ciencias sociales en Canadá. En 2013 fue nombrada directora ejecutiva del Consortium Érudit. Tania, te cedo la palabra y bienvenida.
Thank you very much, Fernando. I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, okay, so start. Just getting set up here, sorry. Can you see my screen properly?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you very much for having me here to present today about Érudit and the work in Canada that we do together with different partners. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate, and thank you for organizing this really very thrilling event that you have here. Before starting, I would like to begin by acknowledging that where I'm situated here in Montreal in Canada and at the University of Montreal, where we are located, long before the French were settled, very different Indigenous people interacted with each other. We wish to pay tribute to these Indigenous people, to their descendants, and to the spirit of fraternity that led to the signing of the Great Peace of Montreal. So I'm going to present to you in English. Sorry, I do not speak Spanish. I work here in Montreal in French. So there is a kind of a mix of accents in my voice, which you're going to hear. I'm the executive director of Érudit, a platform about journal publishing. That hosts and disseminates Canadian journals published in French and English and in the social sciences and humanities. So I'm not going to present very much in detail about the Érudit platform. I think you can, if you know Reda Lake and Cielo, of course, where you are, I think you will know them, and will situate Érudit in the same category of platforms that work in this way with journals. In Canada, we have a big country with a distance from coast to coast of 4,500 kilometers. We have in Montreal situated our project, which is called Érudit, with the Érudit.org platform. But we have a lot of partners that contribute to a thriving ecosystem of journal publishing in social sciences and humanities. And for instance, one you know very well is the Public Knowledge Project, which is situated at Simon Fraser University on the West Coast in British Columbia, who are the developers of open journal systems. So two flagship Canadian initiatives that have been working for more than 20 years to promote dissemination and open research and non-commercial scholarly publishing. We have created a Canadian partnership to make ourselves stronger here in Canada, which is called Coalition Publica. It aims to strengthen collaboration between different Canadian partners involved in journal publishing and scholarly communication in general. So you see that between Érudit and PKP, there is this vast country, and we have all the provinces in there, and there are a lot of people and partners that participate to this ecosystem, and namely a lot of academic libraries that host journals by using the OGS platform. We have these academic libraries, we have funding agencies, we have flagship projects like Érudit and PKP, and we created a collaboration to make everybody more closely work together to improve the efficiency for the journal publishing and independent journal publishing, and a more equitable system here. So we namely worked a lot on the interoperability between OGS and Érudit. to have a decentralized model where journals publish with their academic library in a decentralized context, but the content is aggregated on a single access point on the Érudit platform. So we showcase the Canadian content in French and in English through the Érudit platform. So we continue to develop and led by PKP and Érudit, national open infrastructure dedicated mainly to diamond type scholarly journals, which means these are journals that are open access and free for charge for readers and authors, very important. It's a publication model where we are financed on public money and controlled by the academic community itself, because it's very much attached to the universities. The model promotes bibliodiversity, and it generally serves a wide range of disciplines, languages, and communities. So with this partnership and with our work, we aim for elements of technological development and open source technological know-how, but above all, I think it's really like something where we are meaningful to generate more participation of the community and to build local capacity to preserve this independent and equitable scholarly ecosystem that we have in Canada. The subjects studied in humanities and social sciences are very much rooted in their research content and context, and the analysis relates to specific national traditions, which explains also that there is a persistence of relative linguistic diversity in these disciplines. And I think from your Latin American context, you know that as well, very much. Overall, Canadian and the Francophone journals from Quebec in the French language province, they allow for dissemination of research on national themes. And we know from different studies that these journals benefit sometimes from much greater use within our universities than average international journals. So we have seen that a lot by looking at usage statistics that are provided by our universities. And this is one of the reasons why Érudit and this project has been founded. It's to provide a place where our researchers can still publish about these national and local topics without being threatened by the internationalization of science, which is mainly very important in humanities and social sciences, and more important even when you publish in French within the international context. So Érudit has been founded by 3 universities, University of Montreal, Université Laval, and Université du Québec à Montréal, but it serves as a purpose really like a very large Canadian community. And we know that the content that we disseminate on our platform is viewed by 70% from international users. So our mission is really to promote and to display the research produced in Canada. And it's with a very open access component, but we still work with a 12 months moving wall for journals that would like to use this moving wall. And I'm going to get there to explain to you why this is still there. We have created a collaborative environment where we work with journal publishers, but we are very connected actually to the Canadian and to the international system to make sure that the content that is produced is visible, has an impact, and is seen and funded through different databases, through different library catalogs across the world, and is also compliant with international standards and the evolution of the communication system as well. In Canada, I told you we have so a lot of Canadian academic libraries that contribute, but we really know that this is a situation which is very particular, and we are very lucky in this situation that there is such a small role for commercial publishers still. And this is one of our big objectives, is to preserve this ecosystem where the journals work in an independent way and not influenced by this commercial environment. 47% of all the Canadian HSS journals are using OGS and or Érudit, and we're continuously with our project working on that to promote the use of these open infrastructure more and more. And from year to year, there are more journals using it, but still we have a lot of work to do, as you see, as we are at 47%. And we know also that by providing this environment which promotes open, where we have like these venues where journals can use this publication mode, and where we transition the journals to OA, that the proportion of OA in Canada is increasing over the time. Although, and this is what I referenced for before, the the guidelines that we have in Canada are still around the open access policy with a 12-month embargo. So we have a tri-agency OA policy for more than 10 years, which is really like a very nice context for us, and it's very a helpful context in Canada. But the OA policy is currently still promoting a 12-month embargo. So some of the journals that we host and that we work with still rely on subscription revenues, and we are working there also very closely with the library community and library consortia to develop new ways to support transition to OA and OA publishing, still by counting on OA support that flows from libraries to journals. We also have very newly the tri-agency research data management policy. So there is a new framework that is going to influence the work that we are going to do in the near future by connecting more and more research data towards the publishing workflow. And Canada is currently developing an open science roadmap, which is in place for the government and not necessarily for the research sector at this point, but I think it's something where we're going to be influenced in the near future as well to adapt our situation and our systems and our models more and more to this open science context. So last but not least, to finish, what we do around Érudit and Coalition Publica is not just about open access. It's really about the control of the publishing in our community. So returning the control of the publishing to the researcher, work very closely with the community, build users into the governance, and use the opportunity to strengthen this as a connective tissue between researchers, the publication, the institutions, the funding organizations, and so on. And last but not least, of course, what we do, and this is something that Bianca highlighted very much here as well, we would like to preserve this independent environment to protect ourselves from commercial interests in scholarly publishing. Thank you very much. And I would be very happy to talk with you and see if there are any questions I can answer to.
Muchas gracias, Tania, por tu intervención y compartir pues la experiencia que se estaba llevando a cabo pues en Canadá. Es imprescindible ese trabajo colaborativo, ese espíritu colaborativo que se necesita pues en ciencia abierta. Yo tengo dos preguntas para hacerles a ambas. La primera tiene que ver con cuál es la importancia de los principios de infraestructura abierta para la investigación, específicamente con lo que tiene que ver gobernanza, sostenibilidad y seguridad. Bianca.
Bueno, son fundamentales. O sea, así de claro, tenemos que tener bastante clara en nuestra cabeza. O sea, las reglas del juego de la ciencia las hacen los países del norte. Y nosotros las seguimos, punto. Incluso las seguimos más de lo que deberíamos seguirlas, porque muchas de ellas no nos caben, para decir de alguna forma. O sea, tenemos que estar jugando con todas las piezas que el mundo está jugando. Y la ciencia abierta, por supuesto, si todo está en abierto, la ciencia evoluciona más rápidamente. O sea, hemos tenido más claro que el agua el ejemplo de la pandemia. O sea, solo hemos llegado a una vacuna porque todos han compartido datos e informaciones. Entonces, es muy importante la creación de infraestructuras de ciencia abierta. O sea, en nuestra región es fundamental para que sigamos participando del juego de la ciencia y para el mundo en general, para que intercambiemos y hagamos con que la ciencia evolúa más rápidamente de una manera más sólida y con más calidad.
Gracias, Bianca. Tania, tu apreciación, por favor.
Thank you. There's a little delay in the translation, so sometimes I'm looking at it. I would like to add actually just to that I think we worked a lot during the last 2 decades to build this open infrastructure, and it's not perfect and a lot of pieces are still missing, but we are in a very nice situation of something that is very stable there, where we can build on in Canada as in Latin America. It's still a lot of work to do, I think, but we are also very strong voices and heard voices, I think, about the need for open infrastructure and the need for sustainability for this open infrastructure. So this is sustainability, and to secure access and to secure the maintenance of this system is really key. So we put a lot of effort into that, and sometimes more effort as we want. But I think this is really like the crucial point is to continue to talk, to do these events and to talk about the effect and the necessity of maintaining these infrastructures to be able to develop a sustainable model and equitable model, which can be an alternative to these commercial publishing solution and the evolution of the market, which is going on with data management, and where it's becoming much more complicated actually for us in the next years. So one big, I think, what I retain from these presentations is that we all have the task to think together, how can we work more closely together to reinforce our voices, to make this heard, you know, what we have built during the last decades and what possibilities we have there now, and how can we go together forward in order to make this heard as a common voice against those who talk with very strong voices on the commercial side.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Tania. Y bueno, la segunda pregunta que les tengo es, ¿cómo la accesibilidad y confianza son ejes fundamentales para ambos proyectos?
Bueno, si puedo empezar, son
Sí,
de
por
hecho
favor.
esenciales, o sea, tenemos que trabajar varios conceptos ahí: la ética, la confianza, y tener alguna cosa que se nos ha olvidado completamente, es que la ciencia es un bien público común. Con lo cual, tenemos que dejar todo esta infraestructura existente que nos sirvió durante mucho tiempo y cambiar y volver a ser los dueños de aquello que producimos. O sea, estas infraestructuras comerciales, por ejemplo, ellas son pésimas, principalmente para nosotros, son pésimas para toda la ciencia, porque si no fuera así, los países del norte no habrían creado tanto el movimiento de acceso abierto a la información científica, como ahora la ampliación del movimiento, o sea, el movimiento de la ciencia abierta. O sea, son infraestructuras nada fiables, y que no tienen el mismo objetivo de los investigadores. Básicamente, el objetivo de estas infraestructuras es solamente ganar dinero. Y de los investigadores no, es el último que se ganan es dinero con su producción. O sea, tenemos que volver a pensar en la ciencia. ¿Qué es la ciencia y por qué hacemos ciencia? Básicamente. Y me paro por aquí.
Perfecto, gracias Bianca. Tania.
I think it is, yes, we saw that with the pandemic that it is of primary importance to have reliable sources of scientific content that we can access to. So how do we preserve the role that our researchers and universities play in providing reliable content and then the access to this content? Again, I think we are currently in Canada in the social sciences and humanities in this situation where we can count, as I have shown you, on a very independent ecosystem currently. But it's very fragile and it's always threatened. So I think for us, the main issue here is to continue to create to show the impact and to create data to make this emerge of what powerful infrastructure we have and how we can go forward. So it's about showcasing what we have in order to create the arguments and to create the way forward, the strategy forward for us. I think the game is here to make different partners play together. This is really very important. None of our projects or organizations, we are going to get there alone. Neither in Canada, we need the Canadian collaboration, but we also need the collaboration with you in Latin America, actually, to make this happen. So we have challenges on different levels. We have, of course, funding challenges, but we have mainly the challenge to make the community understand what possibilities we have with open infrastructure and how it is how the possibilities are limited when we rely on commercial systems. And this is not evident. So there is a lot of work to do to talk about our infrastructure, to talk about the content that we have, but also to make understand the larger community about the issues that we have in the science sector and why open science is so important.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Tania, por tu apreciación. Vamos ahora entonces con unas preguntas del público que nos acompaña en línea. Hay una pregunta para Bianca. Perdón, sí, Bianca, sí.
Sí, Fernando, fantástico. Claro, estoy a disposición para contestar la pregunta, pero me gustaría también ser el público ahora y hacer una pregunta a Tanja directamente. Uno de los principales problemas para la diseminación total de las acciones de ciencia abierta es la evaluación de los investigadores, que no tiene en cuenta estas acciones de ciencia abierta. ¿Cómo es realizada el proceso de evaluación en Canadá? Porque aquí en América Latina estamos intentando también hacer una revisión de estos modelos de evaluación, porque sabemos que los investigadores nos dicen, no me gano nada haciendo las cosas de la ciencia abierta, me gano más publicando en revistas comerciales. Entonces, ¿cómo es? Y ¿cree usted que, de hecho, la evaluación es uno de los puntos claves para la difusión y diseminación de la ciencia abierta? Y ya contestaré mi pregunta, ¿vale, Fernando? Perdón, es que tenía muchas ganas de esto.
No, Bianca, tranquila. Tania, te cedo la palabra para responder a Bianca.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, of course, the evaluation process is a big influencer in this discussion. I think from our point of view, I would like to say that perhaps there is hope, but the way is very long. So I think there is a new generation of researchers that is seeing and addressing these questions in a different way, because within the universities, we start to more and more do sensibilization and outreach to the researchers about these issues. So our colleague Vincent Larivière here at University of Montreal is working on this question and knows much more about this than me. But I feel that different universities and that this question about the evaluation and the reaction and the impacts that we create with the old way to do this is very present. So of course, it's going to take still time to change habits and to change the minds of those who change, for instance, programs in funding agencies. But once that we get together the different players that are involved in this question, so namely the university directors and the university presidents, the funding agencies, the academic libraries. So it's again this collaboration of everybody to spread the word around that, to move forward. But there again, it's as big as changing everything to Huawei currently. So how do we get there? I think it's again as a community by discussing this question and talking about it as much as possible, and also explain the interreliance of these things towards, you know, what we do in our day-to-day by building this open infrastructure and working with the researchers around it. So I think it's a colossal task. It's a very big task still to get there. I see a lot of tendencies around in the last 10 years that these things are going to change, but it's still a long way and a lot of outreach to do to make things differently in the future.
Gracias, Tania. Bueno, ahora sí vamos a ver unas preguntas del público que nos acompaña. Vamos a iniciar con una, es para Bianca, de Rosa Caroca, que dice: ¿de qué manera el repositorio Referencia ha visibilizado la investigación y se ha ayudado a mejorar alguna política pública en Latinoamérica comprobable? Es decir, ¿cómo hacer el seguimiento si las investigaciones están siendo usadas por alguna institución gubernamental?
Gracias, Rosa, por la pregunta. Bueno, no se olviden, la red LAReferencia tiene una acción que es una acción práctica, que es la reunión de toda la producción científica de los países en un solo sitio, pero también tiene acciones políticas. O sea, yo diría que solo el hecho que un país se vea impulsado a organizar su producción científica en un nodo nacional, esto ya trae una visibilidad más grande, porque antes teníamos las publicaciones publicadas en varios sitios distintos y no las encontrábamos necesariamente. Entonces, esta reunión nos permite que el país sepa qué es que se produce científicamente y después, cuando forma parte de la referencia, el cosechador de la referencia agrega toda esta producción en un solo sitio y con esto, eso se vuelve visible, por supuesto, a todos los países de la región. Y sabemos que es muy importante una cuestión lingüística, que es nuestros investigadores leen mucho mejor en español y en portugués. O sea, dejemos de historias. O sea, entonces, entre leer un artículo que está en inglés y un artículo que está en español, por ejemplo, el investigador va a leer, y también es muy importante para promocionar nuestros idiomas como lengua de ciencia. Pero a partir del agregador de la referencia, el agregador de la referencia es hoy en día cosechado por el agregador de Europa, el agregador Plenary. O sea, esto significa que toda nuestra producción científica va a parar en Europa. Esto seguramente amplía la visibilidad. Si nosotros no sabíamos qué hacíamos dentro de nuestros países, no sabíamos qué hacía el país vecino, imagínate en Europa. Entonces, esto amplía, sí. Y, por supuesto, esto va generando políticas. Por ejemplo, la política que yo siempre pongo en relieve es la política de Argentina, que ha sido creada después de la creación de la referencia. Ellos ya estaban discutiendo las cuestiones de ciencia abierta, pero la cosa se hizo más fuerte para ellos, ha sido menos difícil crear la política, no digo aprobar, pero crear la política después ya de algún tiempo de funcionamiento de la red y de ver la importancia que esto tenía. Entonces sí, tiene un impacto que es comprobable, o sea, es un impacto de cadena lógico y es un impacto comprobable. Gracias.
Gracias, Bianca. Jimena tiene una pregunta para ti. Jimena.
Sí, yo quería aprovechar que las tenía aquí a las dos. Y tengo dos preguntas. Una para Bianca. Quería preguntarle si ustedes están trabajando, haciendo investigación sobre cómo la referencia está ayudando a citar otros tipos de géneros más allá del artículo. Hablando de cuestiones que tienen que ver con citación, investigación, etcétera, uno de los problemas que también tenemos los y las investigadoras en la región es que en los últimos tiempos todo cambia. El formato artículo también está cambiando y se nos pide muchas veces que publiquemos, a veces entre los mismos colegas, informes, lo mismo la apertura sobre cuestiones que tienen que ver con el acceso a tesis, etcétera. Y esto también es importante que se cite, ¿no? Entonces, también hay un enorme esfuerzo en este momento de gente que trabaja en normas de citación para que este tipo de géneros se citen. Y me parece un gran esfuerzo ahí de la referencia, me parece una innovación increíble y una ayuda enorme para nosotros para poder citar otro tipo de géneros. Quería saber, Bianca, si ustedes tienen algunos datos sobre esto, cuánta importancia también le dan en el proyecto a este tipo de cuestiones, que nos contaras un poquito más, y luego si quieren a continuación tengo una pregunta también para Tanja.
Vale, Jimena. Bueno, te digo, o sea, estudios específicos todavía no tenemos, pero nosotros cosechamos no solamente artículos, o sea, nosotros estamos viendo que, estamos siguiendo qué está pasando con la ciencia y el concepto mismo de artículo está cambiando para todos los lados, el concepto de tesis está cambiando, entonces tenemos que seguir la evolución. Lo importante es que estemos ahí teniendo en cuenta estas diferencias. ¿Y cómo sabemos, por ejemplo, que para las ciencias sociales y humanidades la producción más importante no son los artículos, es decir, los libros? Cosechamos libros también, cosechamos artículos de libros, o sea, no hacemos distinción de este tipo de material. Pero todavía no hemos hecho un estudio porque estamos ahora más bien. Es verdad, es una excelente idea la tuya, pero todavía no nos hemos volcado porque estamos invirtiendo mucho esfuerzo en la creación de las infraestructuras, que sean lo más abierto posible para que pueda, ¿cómo se dice?, pueda contener estas variaciones que tenemos hoy en día de comunicación científica. Pero es una gran idea y voy a presentar a todos los países, si algún de los países, si tú mismo, por ejemplo, Jimena, quieres hacer una investigación sobre esto sería fantástico, porque es un aporte muy importante para todo. Pero no, todavía no, por trabajar todavía muy fuertemente. Somos pocos, pero hacemos muchas cosas. Todavía no hemos llegado ahí, pero llegaremos.
Lo sé. Increíble. Gracias, Bianca. Y Tanja, una pregunta, a lo mejor pasó un poco rápido y lo mencionaste, pero bueno, no viene mal reforzarlo. Me interesaría saber si desde Érudit también tienen alguna postura tomada con relación a la cuestión del multilingüismo y la publicación científica. En los últimos tiempos también hemos asistido globalmente a un montón de conversaciones sobre la importancia de la biodiversidad, del multilingüismo. Ayer en este mismo simposio tuvimos un workshop muy interesante sobre sistemas de traducción. Sin embargo, creo que todavía falta desde lo tecnológico mucho por hacer, pero también propuestas que alimenten el multilingüismo también desde este tipo de iniciativas. Y si se quiere, propuestas donde, o sea, no solamente sea un manifiesto, no digo que no estén mal, no lo estoy criticando, pero digo que a lo mejor hay que tomar acciones un poco más activas para fomentar bien herramientas de traducción automática, etcétera. Querría saber si en Érudit tienen algún plan de trabajo para los próximos años con respecto a esto.
Thank you, Jimena, for talking about this very important point, actually. So what I cannot be very affirmative to say that we have a project ongoing to work on this, but we are collaborating with different other parties in journal publishing and initiatives. So this is one about the multilingualism that comes back a lot. What we do concretely around Érudit, because we can translate, but we still have a lot of work to do just, to index non-English language content properly. So we're working very closely with the Director of Open Access Journals to increase only the French language content, which is indexed and which is discoverable through the Directory of Open Access Journals. So they're beside the fact to look forward and to look for innovative solutions to address these problems. We are still in a situation where on the ground, we work a lot with publishers, with journals to change the way they worked formally to be compliant, with new needs and new to be compliant with the new rules in the OA environment to make their content discoverable. Now, what we are doing currently on the multilingualism front is we collaborate with the French project, which is starting to work on these things, where a group of researchers started to investigate these possibilities, and we collaborate by providing, access to the content to do prototyping and to look at these questions. And we hope actually that there can be a collaboration which is a more fruitful collaboration for the future around these things. But again, I think sometimes and Bianca said that there are some zones where it's very hard for us to go because we are still building these, roots of the open infrastructure. So by projecting us to the future and to create this innovative things, it's hard for us to get there at this point because the sustainability of the main components of our open infrastructure is not stable enough to get to this innovation that could push us in front of the new needs that are there. So we see them, but sometimes our means are limited to go there. So this is one of the big challenges actually that we have. It's not ignoring it and just saying, you know, this is something we're going to do in the future. I think we need to work a lot with the communities and members and collaboration around our platforms to build projects that can help us to get there, to become better, to remain more competitive, and to be to better serve the communities actually in the future. So one of our aims, you know, with this collaboration in Canada around Coalition Publica is to create a governance structure where a lot of stakeholders are involved, and where also users as researchers are more and more involved, to make this, to project this message and to talk about these needs, and to find together with different stakeholders and partners the means to develop these innovations in order to address the needs of the future, actually.
Gracias, Tanja. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Tanja, por tu participación. Yo creo que por cuestión de tiempo ya vamos cerrando la sesión. Con las inquietudes ya finalizamos. Agradecemos a Bianca y a Tanja por habernos acompañado el día de hoy, compartir la experiencia tan interesante de la referencia y Érudit. Y pues a toda la audiencia que nos acompaña, los invito a que sigan en línea a ver la presentación del maestro Leslie Chan y que tengan un bonito día.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. Mil gracias, Bianca y Tanja. Fue una sesión magnífica. El simposio empieza a llenarse de vida, de intercambios, que era lo que estábamos buscando, todas estas conversaciones globales y encontrar caminos conjuntos. Así que fue una alegría para nosotros tener esta sesión con ustedes. Y como decía Fernando, los y las invitamos ahora a que vayan a buscarse un cafecito, una taza de té, un mate, un vaso de agua, un refresco. Y sigamos aquí. Tenemos el enorme honor de tener en la siguiente sesión al maestro Leslie Chan, con una hermosísima presentación. Hemos dejado ahora, a propósito, estos minutitos libres para que todos podamos descansar un poquito y seguir. Vamos a empezar bien puntuales la sesión. En unos 8 minutitos estamos empezando. No se vayan. Vamos a tener al gran Eduardo Giordanino a cargo de la moderación de esta próxima sesión. Los esperamos. En unos 8 minutitos estamos empezando. Gracias. Thank you. Thanks, Tanja. Thanks, Bianca. And Jan, do you want to say something? Leslie, I know you are in the audience.
I think, yeah, while we're waiting, maybe if Leslie wants to check if his,
Yes.
Why don't I stop recording for a second and then we'll check that the slides are working.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Do we stop the live stream or is that just one long live stream?
Yeah. I can then take care of that.
Okay.
Recording the session.
Okay,
And
I will
starting
start
the
recording and you're doing it to live, right? Okay, it's going to start recording right
Yeah,
now.
we are live. We are live. Eduardo, todo tuyo.
Okay, I start now. Bueno, bienvenidos todos a esta jornada de acceso abierto e inclusivo a la investigación. Y ahora vamos a escuchar la ponencia del profesor Leslie Chan sobre repensar la comunicación científica a través de la mirada de la justicia de diseño. Leslie Chan es profesor asociado en el Departamento de Estudios de Desarrollo Global de la Universidad de Toronto Scarborough y director del Knowledge Equity Lab. El profesor Chan investiga sobre la web y su impacto en la creación de conocimiento a nivel local e internacional. Leslie fue uno de los firmantes originales de la Iniciativa de Acceso Abierto de Budapest y también participa activamente en la experimentación e implementación de iniciativas de comunicación científica en todo el mundo. Desde el año 2000 se desempeña como director de BioNine International, que es una plataforma de acceso abierto para revistas científicas del sur global. Leslie es miembro del Consejo Asesor de varias organizaciones internacionales, incluida la Declaración de San Francisco sobre Evaluación de la Investigación, DORA, el Directorio de Revistas de Acceso Abierto, DOAG, y el Comité Directivo de Invest in Open Infraestructure. Bueno, profesor Leslie Chan, lo escuchamos. Your turn.
Thank you very much, Aquaro, for the introduction, and thank you, Jimena and Dan, and the organizers for putting this events together. I know this has been a long time coming. You guys have been talking about this events for quite some months, not years, and then pandemic hit and things have to be adjusted, and now we're online, and even though we're all over the place, at least we get to at least now get a chance to speak to each other. And again, thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to preface by saying that my talk is going to be quite different from the other talks. I was listening to the earlier speakers with Bianca and Tanja with their presentation on the infrastructures in Brazil and in Canada. These are obviously very important large-scale initiatives, regional initiatives, very practical implications. So my talk is actually quite different. My talk is more conceptual than practical, if you will. My purpose is really to provoke some questionings, if you will, of how we think about our current scholarly communication systems. And I'd like to prompt some questions and directions in terms of ways of interrogating the current system and how we could think differently together. And I would invite you at the end of this talk to perhaps add to my questions or add to my suggestions or disagree with what I have to propose. All welcome. So it's in that spirit of provocation that I want to proceed. So this is the title that I have kind of helped myself focus, thinking about scholarly communications through the lens of design justice. I want to begin by acknowledging the influence of this book that I read a couple of years ago by Arturo Escobar. Many of you know Arturo Escobar's scholarships. A lot of work he has done is really questioning a lot of the existing knowledge system in the West and how the Western knowledge system have created a hegemonic, homogenizing way of thinking about the world. And these kind of hegemonic system have a way of foreclosing imaginations. And I want to make the possibilities of imagination as a key point of my intervention, and that is our system of knowledge productions, our globalized system of knowledge production now have slowly but surely foreclosed a lot of possibilities. We used to see a lot more regional diversities, and over the recent years with this internationalizations of publishing, we're seeing more of a process of homogenization and reduction of diversity of ideas and outlets and representations. And these kind of trend are worrying to many of us because these kind of way of thinking really reduce possibilities to very small number of dimensions, and it really reproduces a certain way, a dominant way of thinking. And at the same time, this dominant one world ontologies, which Escobar referred to, have tended to erase the diversity of knowing, particularly indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing. As a result, I think we're all poorer for it. I'm glad in recent years, there's been a revitalization of thinking about the importance of not only the diversity of knowledge, but the need to engage with indigenous way of knowing, because there's so much richness in that body of knowledges around the world that we could draw from in enriching our way of thinking about knowledge production. And so Escobar called for thinking about a design thinking that allow us to think about multiple world existing within this one world that we live in. And he acknowledged as we live in what we call a radically interdependent world. Everything we do is radically connected. I mean, the reason we're locked down right now still is because of this virus that are interconnecting us in very unpredictable ways. And so he's calling for us to think about the importance of design. And again, I also want to build on that point that when we look at our scholarly communication systems, we tend to be just participants of the system itself. We take part in publishing, we take part in peer review, we take part in editorial work. Some of us take part in some design, but by and large, we're just not part of the design process. And I think what we need to think more about is how can we as individuals, not just as scholars and researchers, also think more about having a role in how our system is being designed rather than us fitting into the system itself and trying to adapt to a system which often is very unfair, unjust, and biased against many knowledge system, as I've been saying. So I want to make a number of points to support this argument, and one beginning with the notion of access, because the theme of this meeting is about open and inclusive access to research, and I like to complicate our notion of access and to bring in the political dimension of access, and to then remind us that the kind of infrastructures that we see out there and that we take part in building is never neutral. There's always ideological assumptions and political power built into infrastructures that then constrain the kind of possibilities of scholarships and knowledge dissemination. And so built on that, I would argue that design for knowledge, inclusion, and access needs a grounding in design justice thinking. And I'll outline what some of these design justice principles may look like. And then again, ultimately, how can we work towards freeing our imagination to co-create this one world with multiple world coexisting, right? And how can we work together as communities and as grassroots-driven organizations and a collective to think about our common futures rather than having to be dependent on the kind of infrastructures that are being dominated by a small number of commercial entities. So access is political. By that, I mean, we have a tendency to think about, especially the recent debates about open access and APC model of article processing charge and so forth. And that kind of debate have a tendency to make us forget that, well, while a lot of argument is about prices and costs, ultimately access is very much about who has the power to decide the agenda on the kind of access principle. And so when we say about political, it is really about who have access to power to make decision, how are those power distributed, and how can we make a claim in having a voice in access? And to me, these are political processes. These are not financial process, although finance does play into it. but we tend to let finance and negotiation about finance take over ultimately what are political decision. That is, these are processes that has to do with the governance of our knowledge commons and our productions and our labor. And we need to be thinking about this in these kind of terms, so about who can dictate the agenda and who has the power to claim these agenda and to make others subject to those agenda in the process, and where should these power be vested, right? And increasingly, we see that a lot of these political power is actually being built into infrastructure itself. So much of what we do in scholarly publishing communication is dependent on technology, the network, and a lot of other infrastructures. Primarily, the journals still work as a key infrastructures in the nodes of knowledge networks. But within that, there are lots of other infrastructural elements. Increasingly, things like identifiers for objects, for researchers, linking system, database management, and all these kind of things are crucial infrastructure. But increasingly, they are under more and more control of the legacy publishers, who are now turning into data analytics behemoths that are very much focusing on extracting our data on a incessant basis. One of our research group have been mapping the increasing monopolization of infrastructure, in this case by Elsevier, but I think the other big publishers are doing the same. Springer Nature, through Digital Science and so forth, and Wiley, their own other system. They are creating these very monolithic end-to-end system whereby the researchers, once into the system, has to be dependent on them from the early research stage to the publishings, to the peer review, to later on research assessment, which then affects their academic funding and employment and so forth. So whole reputation management from beginning to end, so to speak, and really the whole life cycle of one's work are being increasingly captured by these closed system of production. And these are essentially data extractive system that insistently take over the kind of scholarly activities and reducing them to a set of numbers and metrics and transactions that can be turned into products that can be packaged and resold and so forth. So the kind of profit-driven design is really in contradiction with the kind of scholarly outcomes that we want to see. That is, how do we want to see research serving the common goods, right? This system is not designed for, those systems are not designed for that. So how do we rethink system design so that these design are grounded in social justice, in centering those who have been marginalized, whose voices been made invisible, and the reason these are so important, because I think this is one of the existential crises that we do face right now, that we live in an increasingly polarized world, and that these kind of polarization further marginalize a lot of important knowledge system. And I think it's important that our system of scholarly communications and the politics of it allow us to recenter a lot of these neglected voices for the collective goods. So some of these design principles have been outlined by Hello?
Occasionally we have some channel interference. I think there was interference with the interpreter there.
Oh, okay, sorry. So there wasn't an instruction at me, right?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Okay, sorry. So I just want to quickly point to some of these design principles put up put out by a group called the Design Justice Network. There should be a web link in there somewhere. I might have forgotten to copy it, and I'll make sure I include that later. But you can easily Google them, the Design Justice Network. Now, I want to underscore the fact that these principles are at this moment are principles, right? They're not been put largely haven't been put into practice yet. So my invitation is that, well, how do we engage with these principles? You know, one that I think that many of hopefully will resonate with the work that you do. How do we begin to engage with these principles in our design of our common infrastructure? And I think it will be interesting to bring these principles into dialogue with technologists, with other scholarly communication folks to say, well, how do these work for us? Or how can we adapt these principles so that it could better serve our community? So let me quickly go through some of these principles. So starting with the need to design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, and to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. And I've given you an example of a highly exploitative commercial system, and how can we move away from that and center other type of community system? And how do we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the design process? And in this case, actually, ourselves, the people who work in scholarly communication, who publish, are the ones that are most directly affected as well, because we are the worker that takes part in the knowledge productions by contributing labors to the process. So we are directly affected, and so we should have a say in how these systems are designed. And how do we prioritize design impact on the community over the intentions of the designers? Right now, we are given the tools to use, but we don't have much say in how the tools are, how that tool comes to be in the first place. We like to think about change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process, rather than simply as a point at the end of a process. And I would like to urge those who build platforms, some of them have presented here, that these platform building could be and should be a collaborative process, in the sense that there should be input from the communities. And often I see these design process being kind of done, and then we're asked to use them. And I would urge them to think about the users, communities, the broader community's input in terms of these design. And how could designer think about themselves as facilitator rather than expert? Of course, in the tech world, a lot of tech people like to see themselves as authority. So this is always not an easy conversation, but one that needs to take place. And then importantly, I think we have to remember that people who live in communities and people who produce knowledge in different ways are really the real expert on their own lived experience and the kind of needs that they have in the kind of tools and infrastructures that they need. And again, this is often missing, right? That we have these tools that we've just assumed is a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, that people in different situation and context could adapt to them, rather than having the tools make that to allow different modes of knowledge engagement and production. And the reason I particularly resonate with this particular theme is because I work with many communities in so-called community-based science participatory research, and far from being homogeneous, communities such as coffee growers or farmers of cottons or fishermen, they all have different knowledge system and their knowledge producer, but they all have slightly different set of needs that would allow them to create and share knowledge with the researchers that coming to work with them. So we need to think about these different ways of redesigning these tools for local context. We share design knowledge and tools So it would be a kind of collaborative process, making sure that they are community-led and sustainable. And importantly, they should be non-exploitative. And again, the notion of exploitation is a key one, because we have historically understood that we go into communities, we take data from the communities, and then we leave and we publish and we benefit from these kind of research, extractive research. And the people themselves who provided the data or whose bodies data we extract from do not benefit from these research. So the question is, how do we make sure that the research design actually allow people to have ways of refusal if it's exploitative, that they can lay claims to their own benefit and make sure the benefit are built into the research process. So, and finally, it is important to see what's already working out there. So again, if we look around the community, around the world, around the people who attend these kind of gathering, we know of many important stories of many places with different needs and so forth. And we just don't have enough of these kind of opportunity to share what's already working at a local level. We tend to hear what's working at some international global levels that kind of becomes some shiny objects that we all want to be a part of. But importantly, what's happening locally and working already is something that are very important. As I mentioned, in recent years, we're seeing a convergence of interests. So it is great to see that. I think we need to, when we think about open and inclusive access to research, we have to think beyond our traditional community. When I go to conferences of this type, we tend to run into the same people who are talking about similar things. We don't move outside of our own circle. And over the past years, I've noticed that many organizations, movements, the food sovereignty movement, for example, the labor movement, of course, the feminist movements for years, and the Black Lives Matters, I Don't Know More, Me Too movement, all these social movements have something to teach us about the importance of common values and for community driven successes. And so it's important to think across sectors, not simply looking again always at the same kind of crowd for wisdom. And I think we will learn a lot from various indigenous communities. Again, indigenous knowledge is not homogeneous. There are hundreds of different indigenous communities around the world with their own knowledge tradition, but there are certain common themes that you tend to see, and one, of course, is the notion of self-determination and sovereignty, right? That because for centuries, a lot of indigenous communities have been subjugated to colonial rules, that they have been forced to give up or to have their knowledge erased and their language killed off. And so there's been a lot of revival, resurgence of indigenous languages and knowledge system. And I think, again, we can learn a lot from these communities about how we can strengthen our own collective resolve. And the other common theme is about reciprocal relationships. It's about mutual obligation and benefit. Again, a lot of the current system of publishings build on profit and exploitation is always one-sided, is how much the system can take from us instead of how much we can support each other. So this notion of relationship building, to me, is something that we've missing in our discussion of scholarly communication. So when we talk about access, again, we forget access is really very much about relationship building, right? It's not simply about a kind of transaction that you can quantify by how much you pay or not. And so reciprocity, relationship building, these are key lessons that we're being reminded over and over again. And then, of course, ensuring that academic research really is reciprocal in terms of benefit with the communities that we work with, and not simply exploiting them for the benefit of our own career. And on that note, if you haven't heard of this particular set of principles, these are indigenous principles for thinking about data management and stewardship. Now, this set of principles arose in response to another famous set of principles that many of you will have heard of, the fair data principle, that refers to data as being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Now, this fair data principles in the last few years, since it's been sort of codified, has taken off big time and it's become sort of the de facto standards in many debates and as policy setup and infrastructure development, particularly for data. But a lot of indigenous scholars reminded us that, well, yes, thinking about data as objects that can be findable, reusable is one thing, but data is often more than just objects. Data is people, it's about people often. And so we cannot think of people as being just objects. Again, these are relationships that we're talking about. And so they reminded us that along with FAIR, we have to think about other principles that honor different ways of knowing, thinking about collective benefit, the authority to control. In other words, the ability to say no, the ability to refuse, to have data made open, right? So we cannot take open as being the de facto standard, because sometimes open could endanger certain individuals or communities or put them at more harms than intended. And of course, there's a lot of responsibilities when data are being collected. So the curation, the care for them, and all that, and of course, ethics of data is highly, highly important. And so this kind of viewpoint, I think it's really important to remind us that open access and open data are not simply technical issues. These are very much issues about human relationship and community well-being. And we tend to forget that in our debate. And speaking of convergence, if you haven't seen this publication, and again, these are I'm highlighting these because I think it's what I said about the convergence of ideas. And if you look at the feminist data principle put forth by this two author, Catherine Stignazio and Lauren Klein, you will see a lot of also common themes throughout what they are calling feminist data principles. These are some of those, these are the key themes, and you will see that they're very much asking us to remember to examine and challenge power, right? Political power, a power to dictate and power to coerce, power to set agenda. These are issues that we need to question when we think about access. And we have to elevate emotion and embodiment that we tend, when we think about knowledge, we tend to think of, again, think about objects, the publications, the books, as if they can be somehow detached from the communities and from the person who made them. So they remind us, feminist scholars have long reminded us that knowledge are embedded, they're embodied in practice, in the communities itself. And we have to honor that relationship as living entities, not simply objects that can be packaged and put on in the system and circulate. And so they also ask us to rethink binaries and hierarchies. Hierarchies of knowledge, of course, is very much still the governing system in academic knowledge production. There's hardly a week that went by that my university send out the university ranking, how our university is being ranked in this global system of university ranking. And of course, all the journals are being ranked according to journals' impact factors. And these are insidious system of normalizing a set of hierarchies that really put a lot of harm in a lot of knowledge system that privileging certain type of knowledge production and marginalize others. And they also talk about, of course, embracing pluralism, a common theme that we have tends to, again, our homogenizing system tends to erase, that the plurality of epistemology, plurality of knowing, our current publishing system really is not good at accommodating all of them. And they remind us that context matter. And as I've been stressing, different community contexts, different historical contexts, different political contexts, all matters a great deal in our design decision. So again, one size doesn't fit all. That really is another way to put it. And so, and then lastly, they also remind us to make labor visible. And I think this is critically important in knowledge production. We have a system where we only highlight, value the end product, the publications, and then the citation count. We forgot the endless hours and labors that are put into the knowledge production process prior to that. And of course, this is the part where gender, race, and inequalities are deeply enmeshed with each other. So we know huge gender disparity in terms of acknowledgement, in terms of knowledge productions. And so it is important that we make visible these kind of system that tends to that invisibilize different forms of labor contribution. So to conclude, I want to take a quote from author Chris Juliet, and I think this quote is very appropriate given what I start out talking about, the kind of infrastructures of extractions, the infrastructure of data extractions that we talked about, that we have increasingly come to rely on these systems, right? And we've forgotten about what he has to say here. And allow me to read it out and then I'll be finished. So Juliet reminds us that the ability to define one's self and tells one's own stories is central to being human and how one relates to others. Platforms ascribing identity through data undermines both. These code-derived identities in turn complement Silicon Valley's pursuit of friction-free interactions, interfaces, and applications in which a user doesn't have to talk to each other, listen to them, engage with them, or even see them. From this point of view, personal interactions are not vital, but inherently messy and presuppose differences in terms of race, class, and ethnicity is held responsible. Platforms then promise to manage the messiness of relationships by reducing them to transactions. Think about that platforms that I show you of Elsevier's, all the machineries that turn these complicated human relationship into numbers and metrics. So the apps and interfaces create an environment where interactions can happen without people having to make any effort to understand or know each other. And I think this is why it is important that we think about the system that we engage in and think about embedding the set of equity consideration that I have highlighted. So I'm concluding, and I hope I have been able to provoke some questions and reaction from you. Thank you for your time.
Gracias, profesor Chan. Es muy interesante todo lo que acabamos de escuchar y le pedimos a los asistentes que si desean hacer preguntas pueden cliquear el icono de la manito o directamente escribirla en el chat. Ya tenemos alguna pregunta que han pasado por el chat. relacionada con el lenguaje, un lenguaje comprensible para los diferentes actores. Así que esta es una pregunta de Rosa Caroca para el profesor Chan, referida a cómo enfoca el lenguaje comprensible para todos los actores de la comunicación.
So if I understand the question correctly, it is about honoring the multiplicity of languages, multilingualism, and of course, multilingualism has been diminishing in the so-called internationalization of science, and I think there is definitely lots of way to return to multilingualism, especially in today's environment. So we can design more technology for that purpose. So that's when, again, the conversation need to take place between the designer and people who are involved in knowledge production themselves, who speak different languages.
Yo también quisiera aprovechar para hacer una pregunta yo, y luego de tan interesantes reflexiones, si usted cree que hay una influencia del método cuantitativo sobre el cualitativo, ya que el enfoque cualitativo de investigación es el que se presenta como para un enfoque más humano con respecto a esa dicotomía de fair y care. Si podría ampliar un poco esa cuestión.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to phrase the question, because I think precisely, the kind of conceptions that privilege fair principles are the ones that also privilege quantitative approach. And so the care principles remind us really that, again, knowledge is embodied in communities, and we need to be able to understand community needs in order to be truthful to the kind of research that is mutually beneficial to both the researchers and the community being affected by them. So in that sense, yeah, that is about relationship building. It's about quality of relationship, not just the quality of the data in quantitative forms, right?
Oh, ok, gracias.
Yeah,
Tenemos otra pregunta de la audiencia.
Oh, I see, sorry. So Rosa clarified her question about language. It's not really about different languages. It's about the difficulties of our technical languages, the academic languages, the scientific languages that are often not accessible to not even their peers, and not let alone the general public. And I agree that this is always a problem. And I think when we think about access, we really need to think about accessibility instead, right? So that accessible language that are understandable to different communities is very, very important. And so this whole notion of knowledge translation is a very important area that we need to also spend more time in terms of designing. So how do we tell stories that also could resonate with different communities, make those languages accessible? Yeah. And I think that part of that has to do with getting away with what I call the tyranny of the academic article format, right? I think over the years we've seen the tightening of these invisible regulations of what constitute an academic article, right? What do you have to have in them? And those requirements makes the academic paper harder and harder to access by the non-specialists, right? And unfortunately, that is intentional And so we need to undo some of that, that elitism and those biases. Yeah. Thanks for that question, and from Rosas from Chile. Thank you.
Tenemos otra pregunta de Mónica Pené, de Argentina, referida a que el cambio debe ir de la mano de un apoyo político, gubernamental. ¿Cómo ve eso en los países del mundo? ¿Ve diferencias entre el hemisferio norte y el sur?
Yeah, even within the Northern Hemisphere, there are lots of differences, and within the Southern Hemisphere, there are lots of differences as well, and also government changes their policies often and frequently, right? So China, for example, have for a number of years been very, let's say, eager to play in this international ranking games. They still are. But I think they're realizing these international ranking games are hurting a lot of local knowledge and research production, right? That a lot of researchers have been encouraged to do so-called internationally visible research, so much so that a lot of their own domestic issues, their own social welfare issues are being neglected because of that. And so it is important, well, China now is trying to switch course and say, well, they want to support more Chinese language journals and more localized research, that they would be paying more attention to localized research rather than just international research. So that's one example of one country changing his mind, if you will. So it's hard to generalize, but of course, then in Europe, we have overarching policies that come out of some private funders that band together to enact policies, and they're not always in alignment, unfortunately, with the scholarly community's interests. Right?
Bueno, gracias. Creo que Daniel o Donel quería hacer alguna pregunta o comentario.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Leslie, for a great presentation, as always. I wanted to pick up something that came in your last quotation that you read, and then that you also mentioned in your answer to the first question. And that's, you mentioned something about talking to the designers. And as you were reading that last quotation mark, I was thinking about the degree to which we benefit from the commodification of us by social media, and how you'd mentioned, for example, that multilingualism is something both that is being constrained, but also can be more supported today. And it's something that I've often worried about or wondered about, which is how best to do this. A hacking ethos where you take things and work against what they were designed to make them your own might be an approach. Standards are an approach. But basically, it feels to me like no matter which route you go down, you end up at the same problem. So hackers, sure, you work against what the tools have been designed to channel you into, but often you're working in a very closed ecosystem. Standards rapidly become a way of smoothing out regional difference and forcing people to end up adopting a dominant pattern. And so how would you recommend that, talking to the designers that you talked about? How is it that we take advantage of the tools and the systems that we have, but do them in a thoughtful design way, the way that you were talking about?
Well, so this is not done often, right? So I would love to learn those who have actually tried this. And this is something I want to call out. We have a small grant to do a design sprint early next year. And I welcome anyone who want to take part in this. And the idea is to bring together tool maker, designers, knowledge makers, and funders to have conversation together. But our goal is not to build big system. Our goal is not to build like platform that would serve multiple people. Our goal is to say, well, how can this community come up with their needs, and then and this community come up with their use case, and how can we come up with some common understanding and tools that could be adapted for these different communities, for their needs. But at the same time, think about a way to sustain the common infrastructure so that people don't have to worry about the whole software updating cycle and those kind of things. So it's a different kind of scaling, right? Scaling a certain part of the infrastructure, but allowing the community to adapt for their own use, which is something not easy at the moment. And so that's the direction I like to see. But your point is extremely well taken. I think in the early days of the internet, we have all naively thought that the internet was this open infrastructures that we can all kind of democratically take part in. And as it turned out, it's not anything from anything but democratic, right? It's the point I was trying to make, that the concentration of power makes it even more insidious. So yeah, we can, in our own way, claim our own spaces, I think, and go from there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bueno, tenemos algunas otras preguntas para el profesor.
I noticed there's some questions in the chat box, and unfortunately, I don't speak any Spanish. I apologize.
Sí, pero para eso me pusieron a mí para que haga de moderador. Ahora pasaré a alguna pregunta referida al lenguaje asequible para todas las comunidades. ¿Cómo ve usted la implementación del Tratado de Marrakech para el acceso a diferentes comunidades?
Yeah, no, I think if I understand correctly, the Marrakech Treaty is more focused on accessibility for the unsighted, and so making sure that the written text could be accessible to people who might not be able to read them because of their visual eyesight issue and other related issue. So I think it is important that we have provision for this kind of accessibility and we need to think about the different communities that, number one, could enjoy in the benefit of science, but also can take part in the making of research and science, right? Because by denying them access, we're also denying them the ability to take part in their own autonomy. So the more tools that we can, the more provision we can to allow people's more autonomy is great.
Bueno, es muy interesante. Tenemos muchas preguntas. Y aquí va otra.
Rosa is offering to teach me Spanish, so I will take you up on that. Thank you, Rosa.
Bueno, here's another. ¿Cómo establecer redes de apoyo para comunidades marginalizadas de manera que puedan brindar sus visiones, sus reflexiones, para ayudar a rediseñar la superestructura y hacerla más accesible?
Yes. So there are many, I visited different, fortunate to visit different parts of the world, and I've always impressed with how many grassroots organizations they already exist. So the first projects that really inspired me in the early 2000s, I visited a village knowledge project in Chennai in India. And this project was supported by the M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation. M.S. Swaminathan was a well-known agricultural scientist, sort of highly regarded as the father of Green Revolution in China. Anyway, he had this project that created, in the early days, what he called the Village Knowledge Project, to make use of the early internet to allow people in small villages to share knowledge and then disseminate it. So they would have one internet connected computer in a remote village, in a fishing village. Someone would then take the information like pricing of market things or the weather or the local news. They would translate it into local languages and then put them on bulletin board outside a village, you know. So these kind of low-tech system about accessibility of information was being rolled out. They call the spoke and wheel model, so that you don't need everyone connected literally, but you have a human networks that can connect people's ideas together, right? So that impressed me a lot, you know, in the early 2000s. And those projects still ongoing. And if you travel around the world, you see many of these local powerful projects, you know. Colleagues in Colombia, the foundations of Charisma, they've been doing a lot of work supporting local communities, advocating for digital rights. And there are digital rights communities all over Latin America. Some of the most powerful digital rights communities are in Latin America. Very, very impressed with all their work. So they exist. We just don't reach out to them. And so it's at our own loss.
Bueno, estimados asistentes, por cuestiones de tiempo tenemos el lugar para una pregunta más y tendríamos que ir finalizando. Si alguien quiere pasar alguna pregunta por el chat o alzar la mano. Bueno, si no hay más preguntas, le agradecemos al profesor Leslie Chan por su brillante exposición que generó muchas cuestiones. Y le pasamos la palabra a Jimena, que se va a referir a las actividades de mañana. Muchas gracias, profesor Chan.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Mil gracias, Leslie, por la brillante participación. Fue una exposición para nosotros muy enriquecedora, no solamente por esta conversación global que queremos tener entre distintos actores e integrantes de estos espacios, sino porque también tu trabajo, Leslie, tu punto de vista aúna cuestiones que para nosotros son importantísimas, que traen a la conversación académica cuestiones como los derechos, como la ética, la justicia, el reconocimiento de las comunidades de nuestros territorios. Creo que ese tipo de conversaciones necesitan tener cada vez un espacio mayor dentro del debate académico. Creo que nos abrís una puerta importantísima para que estos debates estén presentes cada vez más en este tipo de eventos académicos que vamos organizando. Muchísimas gracias, Leslie, de verdad fue para mí un honor y para todos nosotros los organizadores y creo que para toda la audiencia un honor y un placer tenerte aquí. Sobre mañana, seguimos con el simposio. El simposio sigue mañana, sigue el jueves y tenemos aún un gran elenco de excelentes investigadores e investigadoras para seguir disfrutando de nuestros días miércoles y jueves en esta bonita sala de Zoom. Mañana empezamos a las 11 AM Santiago con talleres paralelos. Van a recibir, como siempre, la información a través de la lista sobre las salas de Zoom que vamos a estar utilizando para los talleres paralelos. Y luego vamos a tener una sesión a la tarde con Ricardo Alfarra, Vincent Larivière y Fiona Murphy sobre trabajo y reconocimiento en la academia. Eso el día de mañana. Los esperamos y las esperamos. Cualquier duda o consulta ya saben que nos encuentran a través del mensaje del mail de contacto que tenemos para Zoom, que nos pueden escribir. Y seguimos en contacto por ahí. Saben que tienen la programación en el sitio web del simposio, openandinclusiveresearch.org. La programación está allí, ahora la pegamos en el chat nuevamente para el día de mañana. Los y las esperamos, muchísimas gracias. Gracias nuevamente Leslie, mil gracias Eduardo también por la moderación. Y gracias a todos y todas, hasta mañana, nos estamos viendo.
Thank you, Jimena. Thank you, Aguado. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Professor Chan.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to have you, Leslie. It was a